Well, hey, my name is Ryan Earnhardt from CreativeSoundLab.tv, where audio recording is an art form. Well, today's episode is all about snare drum. It's a really cool week. I'm giving you 2 additional drum takes. So this song that we've been working on is actually going to have 3 unique takes, each with a different snare drum. If you haven't watched part 1 so far, go ahead and watch that now. Today is part 5. And we're going to be listening to snare, really asking some good questions about what the tonalities of the snare drum mean for our mix, and specifically how the snare drum can really tie a kit together. So here's what we're going to be learning today. So part 1 is really the chemistry of the sounds that we hear in the final mix. What's the level of the close mics to the overheads to the room mics? Really just what is that mix and what can we expect out of our close mics? Part 2 is what is the snare's role in the mix, and it's really like a fingerprint for the drum kit. It almost has the effect that when you change out the snare drum, it sounds like the whole drum kit changed. Part 3 is to understand what changing out the snare drum can do for your mix. Let's check it out. So when I first started engineering, I really was always discouraged on the sound of the track coming from the snare drum. I always thought, man, what am I doing? I was using SM57. I tried a couple other mics, but it always just sounded flat. It sounded really chunky. It just never sounded like a polished snare drum sound. And I realized that it's actually a combination. It's a combination of the overheads, the close mics, top and bottom, the room mics. There's lots of different factors that really create the final, snare sound in a mix. I know for me, I typically kind of settle at about 60% of my sound is pretty much coming from the overheads. I have a little bit of that top mic just to add in a little bit of beefiness. I have a good amount of that bottom mic coming in. And then the rest of the way I filled out with the room mics. So I guess my point is that don't be discouraged if you throw an SM57 on a snare drum and it sounds exactly like that. It sounds like a 57 on a snare drum. I think everybody gets that, and I don't think that top tier professionals have these magical SM57s that are better than the rest of us. I think it's more of what you do after that. It's more about how you use the overheads and how you use the room, and really how you process everything to get your final snare sound. Okay, so I have the raw tracks pulled up here of the Supraphonic take. And this is without any effects. I've basically taken it back to square one here. No effects. We're just listening to the sounds of the microphones here and just making comparisons on the chemistry of how they work together. Here's what I have, just a real basic mix using the raw sounds.
We're on the crutches in.
Okay, now let's just start kind of poking around with the sounds here. So this was really the first thing that I was really mentioning is 57 on a snare. It really doesn't sound that flattering to begin with. But then I figured out really how to mix and match the sounds and make them as one cohesive sound. Let's keep moving around here. Here's the bottom side snare mic. Pretty much sounds terrible. Put them together though, and of course mind your phasing here. I believe these are either flipped or were flipped. They were flipped at the time of tracking, it looks like. So let's have a listen to that together. And then this, of course, adds in with their overheads. Here's just the overhead. I always like to think, well, that's my starting point. That's actually what the snare sounds like. Then we're going to move in and kind of boost it up with everything else. So let's bring in the close mic on top. And bring in the bottom mic. And, the argument could be made that you almost don't even need the top mic because you're getting so much, warmth and body. You really could just use the bottom mic. So almost if I had a choice, I almost would just do the bottom. If I was really running short on channels and I knew that maybe my overhead was doing a really good job, maybe it was really well centered, and maybe a dark mic that picked up a lot of kind of low mids from the kit, I might just do a bottom mic. So that's really kind of the top three, and then of course you have the room sound. And, a lot of people say, the snare sounds across the room, the kick sounds in your face. And it's pretty much true. Here's the kick. Here's everything all together. This is without the top mic. So, it's not quite the same without the top mic, but definitely between these two, I almost place an importance more on that underside mic. And that may be counterintuitive, but really it's giving you something that's really critical of what that snare is bringing out. Now, regardless of which way you combine microphones, really the way that I like to think of it is that I'm always listening for how the drums are actually being glued together frequency-wise. And I have a term that I use called the trinity of groove. I know there's a term like trinity of Italian food, which is a garlic, tomato, onion. And this is, for me, the trinity of groove, the three things that really make groove. And right in the middle is snare drum. So if this were frequencies that were, top to bottom, and we have the, we have the low frequencies, and we have the high frequencies, and then of course we have the mid, then right in the middle we have the snare drum. The snare drum kind of occupies, kind of this range, and then the other piece is the hi-hat. That kind of occupies this range. And then, of course, the kick drum. So we have these three elements, the kick, snare, and the hi-hat, that, for me, make up the trinity of groove. Now, just to slap all these together isn't enough. I always like to think that the reason why snare drum is so important to the modern sound of recording and mixing is because it's right in the middle of the top and bottom of the entire drum kit. It's really the identifying factor. It is right where the human hearing is most sensitive, is right in that middle range at, say, 2 to 3, 4K. So let's take an example of, say, a kick that is kind of it's kind of a tight sounding kick drum, very muffled. It sounds like there was an entire pillow thrown into that kick drum, and it's really tight sounding, maybe hanging out at, say, 100 hertz or so. And then the snare is kind of deep tuned, and there's actually some overlap. Okay, it's this zone right in here. Okay, and then of course you have the snares on the bottom of that snare drum, and so there's high end of that drum as well, and that's going to overlap kind of in this area here. And so this is the hi-hat, this is the snare, and this is the kick. And so between the kick and the hi-hat, or the kick and all the cymbals, you basically have an element that can tie everything together, and that's really the snare drum. The toms are really pretty low. I mean, they're down here in this shared territory of, this would be right in about 100 hertz, maybe 80 hertz at its lowest. But really just kind of the beef of the snare drum can really sometimes make a really cool low-end kind of pulsating sound, just like the kick does. And then on the same token, if you have hi-hats that are real loose and sloshy, they can sound really close to the same sound that a snare drum makes from its wires, from its snares. And so the snare drum is really the most critical piece that you get right out of the whole kit. And with the human hearing being so sensitive right in this range, this is why we can, at least in my opinion, identify that something really has changed when we change out the snare. The kick, I think, you could change out the kick with about any kick drum in the world, and if there's lots of muffling involved, you're really not going to notice it like you would the snare. Of course, the cymbals, you can definitely hear all the detail, and so the ear is so sensitive to the slightest thing about the cymbals, whether they're good quality or poor quality, and so that's also very important. But really, speaking of snare, it's really tying the entire kit together with all of its frequency range. So what I've done for this series is actually record 3 different drum takes, and each with a separate snare drum. So we've been working off a take, the Ludwig Supraphonic take. We can just kind of have some fun with this, try out a couple different snare drums, and just see how they affect the big picture of our mix. So here's the drum takes, and once again, you can be downloading these if you'd like. Find the link on the screen or the link in the description. You already have this first one, but I'm making available these 2 takes today. So each has a different snare drum, and then next week we're going to be looking at this take. This take is actually a fresh take, completely recorded in the control room. Went ahead and worked a little bit ahead, and so I'll let you preview that if you'd like to hear it. It's basically a small drum recording, a small room drum recording. So, and then we have basically vocal, guitar, and then bass. I guess this was like the direct or the original bass. And then this was actually a bass that I ran through a WA-76 by Warm Audio, and didn't compress it. I just saturated it using the input transformer. So let's check it out. Here is the Supraphonic, Ludwig Supraphonic drum take. Okay, so real big, flabby, open tones there. And this is, it was intentional why we've been working on this, is because it is actually the more difficult track. I always run from the perspective of working at a more difficult situation than teaching from the most ideal situation. Most of you will be mixing on less than ideal terms, and so it's better that I teach from that same spot. And so this was a challenging drum, and I wanted to teach from the more challenging position here. So that's a cool sound, but you'll see that these are a lot smoother. Let's check out this one. This was the Tama Swing Star. It's a metal 5.5-inch deep snare drum. Yeah, I really dig that one. And by the way, the Supraphonic was 6.5 with a die-cast hoop. This is 5.5 chrome over brass, and it's just got a triple flange hoop. So a little bit less ringing on that one. This one is a Premier Olympic, I believe mahogany, 5.5-inch deep.
We're on the crutches in the shed.
So, we've been talking about just tying the kit together with the tones of the snare, and I really think that this drum here, the Olympic, is very nice, but it's almost too high for the purpose of the exercise that we're talking about. Just listen to the pitch, and just listen to the pitch that it's giving off, and we're going to compare it to this the Swing Star. I keep forgetting the name, but the Tama Swing Star. Okay, now the Swing Star. Okay, so these two snare drums are pretty close in pitch. This one might be a touch higher than the Tama Swing Star, but really what it comes down to is really it's just preference. But I really do like the Swing Star, and there's something about it that it just makes it feel more connected. It sits right in the middle of the kit tonally. This here almost starts to sound more like a piccolo kind of deal, and I don't know why. I just tend to like this one just a touch more. They're both really good. Once again, just a quick overview of the three, and just listen how it sounds like the entire kit is changing with just a change out of one single drum. And as promised, I'll go ahead and play for you next week's demo here. This is really cool how it worked out. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this came out. Small room, 7.5 foot high ceilings there. So even lower ceilings than a typical bedroom. And I'm really pleased with the results. I'll share that with you next week. But let's go ahead and talk about compression. And really, some of these snares are going to really excel at compression. I really think the Olympic is going to be awesome. It's just going to get fatter and fatter. Same thing with the Swing Star. The Superphonic is going to be pretty challenging. So let's check it out. So one of the ways I really like to judge a snare drum, and I try to really think about this as I'm tuning the drum and as I'm recording the drum, is how the drum is going to take compression. And so we're just going to have a listen to the three unique drum takes, each with a different snare drum. And this is a Warm Audio WA76. And I'm just going to kind of show you how each of the three takes really turns out through compression. This will be the kick mic here, or the kick track, and then snare top and snare bottom. This will be the Ludwig Superphonic first. Okay, let's just have a crank and see this to the extreme here. So there's tons of overtones coming in here. Let's just have the release. Let's just crank it up so it's real fast and see what happens. Yeah, so this is definitely a noisy drum. And if I back that down a little bit, we can kind of compensate and kind of take a little bit of that out. Let's see what we get here. This is 20 to 1. Let me just back that down. So, just I can kind of feather this a little bit, but the verdict is really this is a pretty noisy drum. Of course, we have the bottom mic here. Sorry, I just wanted to get this back into a reasonable, typically what I would use for there. Here's the bottom again. So I'm not going to really leave it like this. I'm just trying to push it, see what it's doing, find my settings, and then back it down. That's pretty much my process. Let's just have a listen, speed up the release and slow down the release and the attack. So there's a little bit more of a pop there. And so kind of what I do is I just kind of try to bridge the notes together with all the fuzz from the snares. For me, as a drummer, that's kind of what I want to hear, is just the drums getting fatter and fatter. And all this is really, 1 to 2 dB reduction here. Okay, just real easy on it. Just 1 to 2 dB. I do go heavier with the kick, just to make sure it's just really pounding the whole time, but just really subtly compressing. And by the time you do compression and other stages, bus compression, things like that, it's going to be a lot. So real just subtle stuff here. But we're just kind of testing out each snare drum. Let's test out the next snare drum, the Tama Swing Star. Now, there are some really crazy notes in there. I was playing with this earlier, and we can try to get that here. Of course, we could just do the all buttons mode. Yeah, so I don't know that I'd really choose that necessarily. Really, I'm just trying to make the drum sound better than what it actually does in real life and make sure that it translates in a really dense mix. This is really what it comes down to, is this snare going to really translate, or is it going to fall short? Let's move on to the next drum, the Premier Olympic snare. So this was just kind of a fun experiment to do and really just see how each of these snares hold up in the mix. You can try this stuff on your own, try different compression and EQ and things like that, and really just see how each of the snares hold up. The more that you're able to figure out now in mixing, the better you can make decisions on tracking day as far as, well, that would be an awesome snare. That would be a really bad and difficult snare to mix. So next week's episode is really an extension of this one, the topic of snare drums, and it's inspired by your questions, and I've gotten this a few times about what do I do if a drum kit was recorded in a really small space? How do I make it sound like a big room sound? What exactly are the steps that I can take to emulate recording it in a nicer room for drums? So I'm actually going to be setting up a drum kit in my control room, which has about 7.5 foot ceilings, kind of low ceilings, and it's not terribly big, really to emulate the home studio. I'm going to be walking you through a few of my techniques I would use to get a big room sound from small spaces. I'll see you next week.